Okay, so I'm going to take a little bit of a break from Dan Kimball's book and I'm going to get into crossexamine.org. I keep seeing a bunch of posts from this YouTube channel put up, and I just kind of want to get into them. So this one's titled, Did God Really Command That All the Canaanites Be Killed? And I'm assuming that the setup here is that he's going around to various college campuses and taking questions from. I mean, that's how it's presented. I could be wrong. I don't know anything about what they're doing here, but the way that it's presented is that he's going around to college campuses and he's just taking in audience questions. So let's get into this one.
But a question I have, it kind of has dealt with my past. Definitely grew up as an atheist and was an atheist for a couple years of college.
I don't believe her already right off the bat.
But when we talked about moralism, or we're talking about moral standards, how do we reconcile the moral standards that we see in the Old Testament versus the moral standards of the New Testament? So when I refer to the Old Testament, I'm typically referring to specifically like Joshua and Judges, where you see the like Israelites going into Canaan and conquering kingdoms, and it's saying to devote that all to utter destruction, man, woman.
So she sets up this question in a way that's like, oh, how do we make the Old Testament and the New Testament compatible as far as morals go? But it's interesting that she doesn't leave it there. She says, when I say that, what I mean is specifically the Canaanites. Um, I find it strange that she could have ended the question with how do we reconcile the New and Old Testament's morality, but she goes in a little bit further to say, well, not the entire New Testament and Old Testament. I'm talking about the Canaanites.
Woman, livestock, burned to the ground, killed. You also see like the women being like made slaves or being like added into the family. But also that you see the God of the New Testament says every
For some reason, she felt the need to caveat with made slaves too, or maybe just added into the family.
life has
Remember that.
there's sanctity to life, and that every life has meaning, and I'm dying for that meaning. But yet you see all these people dying.
Well, there's a bunch of issues in there. Let's just take the hardest issue, which I think is this one. Is God immoral for killing the Canaanites?
So it's interesting that this is set up to be, it's presented. If you knew nothing else about this organization, which I don't, it's definitely presented to be that this is just a random question. It's a little strange to me that she stopped in her original question of is the Old Testament, New Testament morality compatible, and then goes on to be like, well, no, specifically the Canaanites. I wonder if you have a slideshow prepared for that.
Right? That's basically what you're
absolutely.
talking in
He does.
Joshua, okay? Well, first of all, the question I want to ask is, if there is no God, why is any Old Testament atrocity wrong? Because atheists typically answer this question. I understand you're not an atheist, but when they say, well, the God of the Bible is immoral, I go, time out, what's your moral standard? If you're an atheist, there is no moral standard.
Well, there absolutely is. The moral standard for atheists, I'll make a video about this one day, but it's not much different from yours. I mean, you would have no objective standard for morality, because if you say this is moral because God said so, all it would take is for me to be like, well, I disagree. I think it is immoral because God said so. And until we get a God down here to clear up the two different views, then your standard of morality is just as subjective as mine.
It's just your opinion, okay? But a fair question for an atheist would be to say, yeah, but you're saying your God's loving, so it's a problem for your worldview. Okay, fair enough. So the next question I want to ask is this. Is God arbitrary, or does he give reasons for judging people in the Old Testament?
Solid question.
He gives reasons.
It's not a solid question, and it's not the question that was asked at all. Is he arbitrary or does he give reasons? Okay, he gives reasons, sure, but the question was, why does he kill people? And he's not saying kill, he's replacing slaughter with judging people.
reasons, right? He doesn't just wake up like a mob boss and go, Canaanites, I want them dead, right? He's got reasons for it. And probably the biggest reason, after 400 years of warning, is that
So God, being omniscient, means that he would know everything, so he can give 400 years of warning. But he would already know that even after 400 years of warning, that they weren't going to give in. So why go through the 400 years of warning at all? He would already know that after the 400 years were up, they still weren't going to do it. He already knew this.
the Canaanites were sacrificing their children on the molten hot god Molech, this idol. They would heat this thing up. It was metal, and then they'd put their baby.
I'm just going to give it to him. Let's just say that this is true. I don't know. Maybe they did this. Maybe they didn't do this. I don't know. But let's just say that they did. That still wouldn't give any reason why he would kill this one group of people who were doing it, because I'm sure at the same time throughout the entire world, this was also some type of a human sacrifice was happening, and God didn't seem to care unless it was adjacent to Israel for some reason. Very strange.
Babies on the arms of this being.
I think it's more an appeal to emotion, because who's gonna go against that? He's like, they were killing babies. Like, all right, well, human sacrifice is human sacrifice, whether they're babies or children or adults or elderly, whatever it may be. And this was happening throughout the whole world. But for some reason, God just wanted to attack the Canaanites, who were directly bordered with Israel. That's very interesting that God's standard for morality and stopping immorality relies solely on whether or not it's geographically convenient.
This idol, and watch their babies sizzle to death.
Oh,
in
no.
fact, Plutarch, who was a Greek writer, this is not in the Bible, he says that the villagers would beat their drums louder when this was going on, so the parents
I've heard
couldn't
this
hear the
before.
screams of their own children
I'm sure.
being sacrificed. Now, on every college campus I go to, typically an atheist will stand up, well, if there's a good God, why doesn't he stop all the evil in the world? Well, here's a situation where God saw evil and said, that's it, we got to stop it. Israelites, go stop it.
Come on, man. He didn't say, hey, let's go stop it by absolutely massacring everybody. It's almost difficult to make these kind of videos because there's so many different ways in which it's misleading and dishonest that it's almost hard to connect all the dots. So just bring it down. He says, here's a situation where God stops the killing of Canaanite babies, and atheists are mad about it.
And now they're complaining,
Well, complaining.
right? So why complain that God doesn't stop evil, but then complain when he does? Now,
Again, that's not the question that was asked. Why was this slideshow already prepared for this apparently random question? Audience has a good question, but he still hasn't addressed her question at all, which was so specifically about Canaanites, and not to mention all the other atrocities of the Old Testament. Why complain that God doesn't stop evil, but then complain when he does? Well, there's a couple of really good reasons for that. It would be more like, good reasons for that question. It'd be more like, why someone would complain when God doesn't stop evil. Because according to this segment right here, his stopping of evil is geographically determined. So why doesn't he stop evil all around the world? I'd assume that'd be because he gives free will. That would be the response. Why does he stop evil? Because he gives free will. Well, he clearly didn't care about the free will right here. So he does have the ability to stop the evil, but then creates an even more evil act to stop that evil act. But then when asked why he doesn't stop all evil, it'd be because free will, but clearly he's violating free will right here. So what?
now what they will say is, yeah, but God went too far. He said wipe out everybody, including the children. God's stopping the Canaanites for killing children, but then God says go in and kill them anyway. Now, how does that make any sense? Well, there's two ways of looking at this. One way,
we can just make some flowery language to make it sound like it wasn't all that serious. Or we can take it literally.
is a book written by Paul Copan. I don't know if you've ever heard this book. It's called Is God a Moral Monster? And Copan's an expert in the Old Testament. And he says, When you read something like in, say, Deuteronomy 7, where it says, go wipe everybody out, man, women, child, all that, you've got to realize this is known as hyperbolic language. Because if you
Go wipe everybody out. This is just hyperbolic. He doesn't mean wipe everybody out. He just means most of them. What?
read the next verse, it says, and then don't intermarry with them.
Well, let's just give that a little look. See, so Deuteronomy 7. So here's another way he's being misleading. He says, "Go wipe them out," but then in the next verse it says, "Don't intermarry with them." Well, how could you intermarry with them if there was anybody left? So clearly he didn't mean to wipe everybody out, right? Well, that's not how the passage reads. Old Testament, sorry. Deuteronomy 7. I do believe he said, driving out the nations. Okay, so he says, okay, do not intermarry with them. So right after telling to wipe out, he says, do not intermarry with them. I don't want the prayer guide. Jesus. So let's just play this a little bit more, and then we'll go back into it.
You go, wait a minute. If you just wiped everybody out, how could you intermarry with them? They're dead. The point is that in the ancient Near East culture, they used language like this to demonstrate that this had to be a victory, a decisive victory. It didn't mean, it would be like us saying, well, you know, the Chiefs annihilated the Rams.
Oh, my goodness gracious. How old is this video? Okay, 4 years ago. I wonder when Dan Kimball wrote his book, because he gave the exact same, my goodness, this might be Dan Kimball. Who is this? I don't know. So yeah, Dan Kimball gives the exact same thing in his book, but you know, never read a Bible verse. So he says, don't intermarry with them, but that's not how it reads, and he knows this. So let's just read it out flat. Okay, we'll start with 2. It says, and when the Lord your God has delivered them over to you, and you have defeated them, you must destroy them totally. Now, the version that he gave was already covered here. When you have defeated them, that would be a decisive victory. You've already defeated them, but after you defeated them, then you must destroy them totally. Make no treaty with them, and show no mercy. Now he leaves that out. He says the very next line is, do not intermarry with them. But this is how it should read. Then you must destroy them totally. Make no treaty with them, show them no mercy. Do not intermarry with them. Do not give your daughters to their sons, or take their daughters for your sons. For they will turn your children away from following me to serve other gods, and the Lord's anger will burn against you and quickly destroy you. Okay, that's how it actually reads. Excuse me. He's not saying don't intermarry with them. He's saying it would be better worded like this. Do not intermarry with them. Make no treaty with them. Show them no mercy. Do not give your daughters to their sons. Do not take their daughters for your sons. Destroy them totally. That's how it would actually read, and surely he must know that.
We wouldn't mean that the Rams no longer exist, right? It's just a strong way of saying they beat them badly. That's one view. The other view...
Well, comparing an absolute annihilation of a people to winning a sports game is pretty dishonest.
Is the traditional view that, no, he literally meant to take their lives. Well, what do we say to that? Let's take the harder view, that God said...
Well, which one is it? Which one's correct? You're giving both sides of the argument. If you give both sides of the argument, then how could you be wrong?
Everybody should die. Can God do that? Here's my question. Is God committing murder by ending lives on earth? When somebody dies, does God murder them?
So in one, it's hyperbolic, and if it's not hyperbolic and it's literal, then he has the right to do it anyway. So how do you lose this argument when you take both sides?
No, God can't murder anyone because he's the creator of life. So when he takes life, that's up to him. He can resurrect life. We can't do that, so we don't have the authority to take innocent human beings' lives. But God does. So if God wants to take somebody's life, he can.
And he, in the beginning of this, said that atheists don't have any objective morality, but their objective morality would be if God says so, then it's cool. If then any moral action could be justified by this God. If you killed somebody, you just be like, well, God said I could do it. Then it's automatically correct because God doesn't take a life. He just sent other people to take a life. How would you tell the difference? How would you tell the difference between someone who was actually sent on a mission from God to take another life and somebody who is just crazy and says God sent them on a mission to take another life? That's very objective.
And if he has a reason for it, he might explain the reason, he might not. But he has the...
Well, that's convenient. Maybe he says it, maybe he doesn't. I don't know. It's God. He's cool.
authority to do that. In fact, if Christianity is true, people don't really die, they just change location, right? They move from one life to the next life. So God has the right to usher people into the next life, whether they are 2 years old or 82 years old.
Oh my God. This is the objective morality, that God can kill 2-year-old. Now he says, usher people into the next life. But what he really means is God can kill 2-year-olds, and it's totally cool. Because he's God.
God can do that, we can't. Now, one more
Unless, of course, we're commanded by God, like the Israelites were to the Canaanites.
thing on this, and Copan goes into a lot more detail than I'm doing here. But one more detail on this, I think we need to recognize. The Old Testament theocracy was unique and temporary. It was not the ideal for all time, but the means to a promised new covenant. God wanted to get the promised people in the promised land to bring forth the promised Messiah to be a blessing to the whole world. And if he gave 400 years of warnings to the Canaanites who were doing these detestable practices and they wouldn't stop,
he would know that they wouldn't stop. He's God.
His only choice at that point, with free creatures, was to use force.
Well, okay, so there you go with the free creatures part. But this part right here kind of goes against your free creatures. Why complain that God doesn't stop evil, but then complain when he does? Well, are we free creatures or not?
Forced to push them out or to drive them out. And that's apparently what he did. Now, God can do that.
Push them out, dry them out. No, wipe them, completely annihilate them.
So, the Old Testament is, as I say here, temporary, and it was never meant to be the ideal law for all time. In fact, everything from Exodus 20, the Ten Commandments, all the way through Deuteronomy does not apply to Christians. You know the Ten Commandments don't apply to Christians? Did you know that?
This is 100% not the question that was asked. What are you talking about right now?
Only if they're repeated in the New Testament, and 9 out of the 10 are. The only one that's not repeated is keep holy the Sabbath. Why? Because who's the Sabbath? Jesus. He's already arrived. The Sabbath is our rest.
Jesus is the Sabbath?
But unless something's repeated and renewed in the New Testament, it's not applicable to Christians today.
Slaves obey your masters, especially the cruel ones.
And this isn't taught very often in church either. Oftentimes we just go to the Bible like it's some kind of fortune book and just stick our finger in there and start reading. That's not the way the Bible is supposed to be read.
Look at oh my God. I hope I'm wrong, and I hope that this was not supposed to be honestly set up as some random college student asking this random question, because she's like, look at her face. She's like, yeah, this makes total sense, shaking her head. Like, no, dude, none of this makes any sense. Come on.
In fact, this is going to sound shocking, but there are no verses in the Bible.
That's not shocking at all.
Did you know that? There are no verses in the Bible. The verses were added about 500 years ago to allow us to navigate the text, but there are no verses in the Bible. The advantage of verses in the Bible is it helps us navigate the text. The disadvantage is we tend to think that these verses are individual nuggets of truth that we can apply any way we want.
What does this have to do with the Old Testament morality of God commanding the Israelites to slaughter the Canaanites?
That's not the way the Bible's intended to be read. About the only place you can do that is Proverbs in most cases. Everywhere else, you've got to figure out the context and what's going on. Does this make sense?
Yes, sir.
No.
Okay.
Oh, yes, this makes total sense. Everything you just said. What a wonderful answer you just get. Like, come on, man. Either I have this wrong, or this is such a setup that it's almost a joke.
A lot more in the book, though. Please get the book. Not my book. I'm talking about the book from Paul Copan called is God a moral monster?
Okay.
All
Thank
right.
you.
Thanks. Great question.
Okay, great question. Sorry I didn't answer it.
His
go back
only
to his-
choice at that point, when
Let's go
somebody
back
dies
to his,
for it,
what do you
God
have,
can
his
do that.
whole-
We can't. Promise people in the promised land to.
Okay, so was God? Okay, we'll go with the title of the video. Did God really command that all Canaanites be killed? So his answer is, if there is no God, why isn't it atrocity? Okay, so did he command the Canaanites be killed? Point number two, is God arbitrary or does he give reasons for judging, murdering people in the Old Testament? Okay, so did he really command that all Canaanites be killed? Oh, still haven't gotten there. Why complain that God doesn't stop evil, but then complain when he does? Okay, so did he really command that the Canaanites be killed? So we'll finally get to our first answer: is God committing murder by ending lives on Earth? So his first answer is, his first answer was that it's hyperbolic and they didn't mean actually wipe them out. His second answer is, well, even if he did mean wipe them out, God can do that because it's totally cool. He's God. So, did God command the Canaanites to be killed or not, man? I still don't know the answer to this question. If he did, it was fine, but also it might have just been hyperbole. Okay.
To bring forth the promised Messiah to be a blessing to the whole world.
I guess the final take on this would be that, I mean, when you read Deuteronomy as it's supposed to read, he's clearly giving, God is clearly giving them the order to wipe them out, because even if it was hyperbolic language, that would already been covered when he says, uh, you have defeated them. And then after you have defeated them, the victory is already there. You've won. Then you must destroy them totally. Make no treaty with them and show them no mercy. Don't marry them. Don't give them to your daughters for sons or sons for daughters, because if you do that, then they're going to turn you away from serving me, and you'll start serving other gods. Well, what's a good way to stop them from doing that? Destroying them totally. Apologetics are trash.